What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com. My name is Sean Sheehan, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the Cage Warriors Supremo. I usually call like Graham the Supremo or Dana White the Supremo or Scott, but I'm calling you the Supremo. You're running the media, running the commentary, running it all. Brad Wharton here before Cage Warriors 156. Brad, how are you today? It's great to be back. It's been a while since we've done one of these. It feels like ages.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, I mean, it's great to be back, especially after that fantastic introduction. And as long as Graham doesn't hear it, I'm sure I'll be safe to commentate many Cage Warriors events in the future going forward as well. But I will take the Supremo tag for today. Thank you.
Since he gave me them gloves, though, I think he'll have to be watching out because he made me he made me swear I'd put him in the back of all my videos. So maybe he is watching. But hello, Graham, if you are watching. But we'll get into the card in a second. But I want to do a quick state of the Cagers. We do a state of the UFC and just a quick look at the champion stuff. And do you know what? We might actually, in a couple of weeks or a couple of months' time, we might do another one of these in full. I was just looking there. You go onto cagewarriors.com and you look at the champions page. I don't think there's ever been a time with as high quality champions as there is now. Obviously, Cage Warriors has a lot of turnover because the champions, get signed to the UFC, and that's what Cage Warriors is unashamedly all about, as they should be. But someone asked me the other day, who would be your top three people to get signed from Cage Warriors to the UFC? And look, a little bit biased towards the Irish lads, of course, but I said Caelan, Paul Hughes, and Reece McKee. And you look at the other champions. You look at like George Hardwick is obviously going to the Dana White Contender Series now. Mick Stanton is fighting here in a couple of weeks, and we'll get into that in a second. And Shashak has been around for a long time, but a guy as well, he can put a run together. You'd never know. And then we just saw Modestus, who was obviously the light heavyweight champion, recently go over to the UFC. Like, there's never been, in a good way and a bad way for Cage Warriors, I suppose, there's never been a time where there's more champions who probably are on the cusp or should be in the UFC, are definitely the quality of the UFC. But then obviously they'll lose those champions as well. Plus you add in O'Ban Elliott, who maybe we'll talk about a little bit later on as well. It's just frightening at the moment, the level of quality that was in Cage Warriors. And it's a thing that I remember when Paddy went and when Ian Gary went, it's like, oh God, is there a bit of a lull now? Is we're going to have a few issues now? But it's better now, I think, than it ever has been. Would you agree with that? At the top level anyway, it's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, I absolutely would agree. Just running through the sort of list of champions in my head, and there's been plenty of times when there's been a really strong welterweight division or a really strong bantamweight division, but I don't think it would be unfair or overly biased of me to say right now that I don't think there's a single Cage Warriors champion that isn't deserving of a fight, on the Contender Series or in the UFC. Would you be massively shocked if Mick Stanton won in the summer and ended up on the Contender Series? I wouldn't, I think there's definitely been a lot of times where you could say, oh, well, this guy maybe needs one or two more fights. This guy needs one or two more fights. But I think Caelan, you could put him right in there. Paul Hughes right in there. Reece McKee right in there. George Hardwick, as you say, he's going to be fighting in the Contender Series anyway. It's a good time. It's a good time to be a Cage Warriors fan.
And it's funny, like the last time I spoke to Graham, he basically kind of said, look, George Hardwick could have been in the UFC, but he wanted to have a couple more fights, and obviously now he's fighting a Contender Series. Like Caelan is the only one, I suppose. You look at and go, maybe he could do one or two more fights, but not based on his ability, just based on how many fights he's had. And when I interviewed him, I said that to him, and he agreed with me, but then he said, fuck it, I want to go there anyway, type of thing. So, and I look, he definitely has the quality to go there. I was actually watching his win over Dylan Hazan again last night. For some reason, it just popped up, and I watched it, and I was like, he's so good. Like, it was absolutely brilliant. Just on the other lads, though, like for Reece and for Paul Hughes, that the lure of the UFC, the lure of the Dana White Contender Series, but also the lure of the big card that's coming up. Obviously in the RDS, it was supposed to be in the Tree Arena, but it's obviously been moved forward. The schedule has been moved around a little bit, and people obviously be able to check that out online. But still, the big arena, the RDS as well. I'm sure there's going to be a big crowd, and we saw. Was it the last Cage Warriors card, or was it in Dublin? That the crowd that showed up, the atmosphere that was there, the reception that Reece McKee got. It's a thing you talk about, right? When, say, Ian Gary went to the UFC and he said he didn't have that. He didn't have the Irish card. It's happened for other people as well. Like, Reece McKee has had that. If you're Caelan, right, you're Paul Hughes, do you want that? It's a massive kind of question. Like, do you want that are you going to kind of give that up to go to the Contender Series, to go to the UFC immediately? Like, it must be such a hard decision, Brad, to actually have one more fight with Cage Warriors or go straight to the UFC. George Hardwick didn't, it worked out for him. Lots of lads have done it and it's worked out for him. Now, maybe some lads it hasn't worked out for, but what do you think on Paul and Caelan? Like, it would be great to see them fighting Cage Warriors once more, even though the pull of the UFC is massive.
I think, there's different ways of looking at it. Selfishly, I'd love them to stay here forever because I really enjoy commentating on their fights. And having the pleasure to play like a very tiny part, but the part that I do play in their careers, calling their fights and telling their stories. I'd love Paul Hughes to have his next 15 fights in Cage Warriors because he's an absolute pleasure to watch. I think looking at it from sort of a bigger picture point of view, as you say, that 3 arena crowd that Reece had, and he had it in Belfast and he had it in Dublin. Those are real like star making moments for me. You saw it with Nathaniel Wood in London, for example. That was probably one of the best examples I could give you, really. Unless we're going back to the days of the Helix of making that arena your fortress and guys coming in trying to knock you off the top of the heap in your hometown in front of your home crowd. And Nathaniel Wood did that in London, and it made him an absolute star. And I think if Paul Hughes or Reece McKee or Caelan were to have another headlining bout in Dublin, for example, I think it would do a similar thing for them. But at the same time, it's a gamble for a guy like Paul Hughes to be fighting another guy in Cage Warriors now because he's not getting any easy fights at this stage. He's either going to have to face, a Jordan Vicenik again, or a Morgan Charrier again, or a Tobias Harilla again. Otherwise, it's going to be maybe a UFC veteran that they have to get in for him. So it's whether you want to take that risk, I guess, and that's obviously down to the individual fighter. As you say, George Hardwick, a great example of someone who said, you know what, I want to stay as active as possible. I'm not going to wait around for the UFC to maybe offer me, a late replacement fight or something like that. I'm just going to keep fighting, stay active, defend the belt. And it's worked out really well for him. And I think, he definitely could have been on the London card, but I think he's going to get this Contender Series slot. It's going to be a huge showcase for him. And then he's going to go into the UFC riding a wave of momentum.
100%. The last thing before we move on to the Welsh card, and it's connected with Wales as well, because at the moment, Cage Warriors are doing a great job of going to and signing fighters from so many different parts of Europe. Like if you look at the 3 Irish champions are all from Ulster. There's a massive card on in Dublin and they fill the place. But then you have obviously the Team GF lads, Team Rhino guys in Dublin as well. Obviously we're going to talk about the Welsh card. You have the King of Middlesbrough and the Prince of Middlesbrough and the Hardwicks up there. Morgan Sharia, obviously, and you mentioned Nathaniel Wood. The second you said that, I was thinking of Vucinic. Like his walkouts recently in London have been unbelievable. And if Paul Hughes goes and he goes to the UFC, like I don't think anyone would look past Vucinic getting another shot. Maybe it's Vucinic and Sharia again. Could be a massive fight. But what about Italy, first of all? Because there's probably an Italian card coming up in a few weeks we might be talking about again and coming on here, but Italy, I remember us doing a preview maybe, I don't know, a year and a half ago, and we were like, oh, Ian Dean has signed another Italian fighter, and now all that work that has been put into place is really, it's really coming true because you see those Italian cards and you see the Italian people in the main events and in the main cards, we saw Bellator going there and they didn't have that and it wasn't the same. What Cage Warriors have in Italy, I know you've obviously been over there commentating on the cards, it must be so special that as well. Like you've seen it in Dublin, you've seen it in London, you've seen it everywhere else, but now to have it in Italy as well, it's really amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, the atmosphere was incredible. So I've only actually done one of the Italy events. I came down with COVID about 2 days before I was supposed to fly in October for the first one, which was the Martin Yoni versus Don Wooding fight. And I got to watch it on TV, which is obviously the first time I've watched a live Cage Warriors in years. And the atmosphere was just incredible. And talking to Dan and the lads who were over there commentating, they just said, no, when you're here in May, it's completely different. It's insane. And I kind of had a very high expectation for it, and it just completely blew that expectation out of the water. It was very much like going into the Helix, and there was kind of like that coiled atmosphere that you would get before Conor fought, where you didn't know if it was going to go really well or it was all going to kick off. But thankfully, the fans were insane. They were absolutely incredible. Obviously, Caelan had about, maybe 50 to 100 people there as well. So there was a big Irish contingent, and obviously they're surrounded by Italians. Everyone behaved themselves impeccably, has to be said. Obviously, there was a few beers down across the course of the evening, and a couple of them ended up going in the air towards the end. But just the respect shown was absolutely incredible from the fans. The atmosphere was great, and as you say, the fact is those cards are built on local fighters. There's a lot of guys from Aurora MMA, which are the big gyms out there, very near the venue, and other local talent. So you do that, you build it from the foundations up, and as the saying goes, if you build it, they will come, and that's exactly what we saw.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic because European MMA over the last few years, and you've probably covered and talked about it better than anyone else, has been brilliant, from Cage Warriors to what KSW have been doing as well, and obviously other promotions seeing that, coming in and signing up big talent as well. And there's probably never been more opportunities for the European fighters, and I think that's kind of bred life into the scene more so than everywhere. And you see these pockets of places up the is the Northwest, isn't it? Yeah, for Newcastle and Middlesbrough, is that Northwest or Northeast?
That's Northeast.
Northeast, yeah, I always mix them up. My guy Jake Smith over there covering that, it's a real hotbed now as well. Plus, let's talk about Wales, because this card is, on paper we all thought this card was going to be absolutely unbelievable, and then we looked, the two biggest names on the card obviously fell out of it, and that's going to hurt any card. If it happened to the UFC card, the Bellator card, the Cage Warriors Ireland card, we all know that's going to happen. But still in all, I think this is maybe a one to kind of whet the appetite, and I'm sure Cage Warriors will be back again. But still, we have some good fights on. Just first of all, before we get into the actual fights itself, Mason Jones and Oban Elliott, it felt like this card was the Oban Elliott card, when it was released. We're going back to Wales. Oban Elliott was the one on the poster, he was the first one there. Then obviously Oban got called to Contender Series, a massive opportunity, and he's dead right to take it. And then it looked like Mason Jones was getting on it. But, Cage Warriors have been pretty bullish about saying no one wanted to fight Mason Jones. And, I can't blame people for not taking a short notice fighting against Mason Jones, to be honest. But what about the two of them? Just for Welsh MMA in general, before we get into maybe Cage Warriors and stuff, it looks like there could be a bit of a golden generation of Welsh MMA starting with them and with other lads that have already been paving the way. But those two lads, in Cage Warriors / half in and out of Cage Warriors, it's a big time for the scene.
I think if you could mash Oban and Mason together and make one fighter out of them, Mason's just sheer tenacity and punching power, and Oban's trash talk and grit, I think you've got potentially the perfect MMA superstar to lead that Welsh generation. But joking aside, they're two exceptional talents and two men that I've got the absolute world of respect for. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Getting to sit cage side in that empty arena show where Mason Jones moved up to welterweight and fought Adam Proctor and stopped him in the first round is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen live. It was absolutely wild. The size difference and just the power when they were connecting was insane. And seeing Mason do that and go to the UFC was crazy. And Oban, man, talk about a guy earning it. It's taking hard fights constantly, grinding away. He gets the game. He gets the media side of it as well. Fantastic to see him get this opportunity, and I'm sure he's going to do a lot with it. I think it was pretty obvious. When we announced the event, it was Mason. It was Oban rather on the poster. Obviously coming off that big win against James Sheehan in Dublin, and I think it was time for Oban to get his flowers and main event the card. I don't know, or genuinely don't know, if it was going to be for an interim title. I assumed that Reece wouldn't have been ready to fight on that Wales card, regardless of anything else. So I don't know if it was maybe going to have been an interim title situation or just a main event. Saw a couple of the opponents they were talking about, and they were very, very tasty. So I was gutted a little bit when I first heard that. But you've got to respect what Oban's done, and he deserves this opportunity. And yeah, Mason Jones, I wouldn't fight him on 2 years' notice, let alone 2 weeks' notice. So
me neither.
I can't blame. I certainly can't blame anyone for turning it down. But look, that's the tough thing when you've got a guy as good as Mason coming off some good fights in the UFC, going the distance with some very, very tough guys, and how dangerous he is. it's not the kind of guy you can get a last minute stand in for. Look, if we really, really wanted to, Ian Dean, I'm sure, would have been able to find somebody to fight Mason Jones, but Mason doesn't want to just fight somebody. He wants a good test that's going to put him, back up on top. And that's not what Cage Warrior is about. So I believe he's going to be moved to another card in the summer, and it won't be too long before we see the Dragon back in action.
What you should have done is got all the UK journeymen and just lined them up and have Mason Jones. Throw out a few of the names there. What are we
going to do with the other 20 minutes?
I would watch that. I love watching those fights. I know some people hate them, but I absolutely love watching them. Anyway, let's get into the card. I think we look at the card, and we were talking during the week, and kind of look, the main event was actually just announced. It's going to be Matthew Bonner versus Darren Stewart. But there's a couple of big Welsh names on it as well, and Rory Evans was in with a shout, and a few more as well. Reece McEwan obviously was in with a shout, being 6-1 and maybe on the verge of a title shot there in obviously a 135 as well. But it is Matthew Bonner versus Darren Stewart, and I suppose it makes most sense because in 2 weeks' time we have the title fight coming up between the champion Mick Stanton and James Webb, and the rematch there. And I think whoever wins that, I think they probably will have a couple more fights in Cage Warrior. So it's one of those fights where we actually can kind of move on pretty quickly, and the winner of this could fight against the winner of that. And you look at the runs they're on at the moment, both of these lads, and it's very interesting because Darren Stewart came back, obviously was in the UFC and had a long run there since 2016, yeah, it's a long time. And then he comes back, loses to Mick Stanton, obviously the champion, but has won his last 2 in a row, one big knockout in the middle of that as well. And then, Matthew Bonner, the former champion who, beat James Webb, and if James Webb wins in a couple of weeks' time, that I suppose writes itself if he's the champion, beating Matthias Frederick. And even since then, he's only lost to Jadi Milan and Oban Elliott, has won 4 of his last 5 fights. So if he was to win this, go 3 in a row, 5 of his last 6, he's definitely in for talks with a title shot here. It's interesting. I remember last time we talked about Darren Stewart, and we kind of mentioned lads who are in the UFC and come over, and we saw with Judo Jimmy as well, and I know Darren Stewart's a little bit younger, he's only 32 years of age, but it feels like these lads are coming over to Cage Warriors. They have had their long run in the UFC, and they're like, I've kind of onto a shot for nothing here. They're almost producing some of the best fights in their career and some of the best moments in their career when maybe the pressure's off a little bit. And I feel like for Darren Stewart here, it's a great opportunity for him to get back into a Cage Warriors title fight with a big win here, and obviously it's a big opportunity for Matthew Bonner as well, at 32 years of age as well. Both of them have the ability even to get back to the UFC with a couple more wins, but it's a good main event. One with jeopardy, as we all, the word we love to say these days, and the winner probably will fight for the title, won't they?
I would imagine so, yeah. I mean, like you say, jeopardy is the key thing, right? There's a lot going on with this fight. They're both coming in on the back of 2 wins. They've got a common opponent there as well. I think there was only about 45 seconds different in the amount of time they were in the cage with that common opponent, Guilherme Cadena. So you've got that for starters. You've got the fact that, as you said, the current champion, Mick Stanton, he kind of spoiled Darren Stewart's return to Cage Warriors. I'm sure Darren will be keen to run that back over 5 rounds and see if he gets a different outcome. You also look a bit further back, and you've got Matt Bonner versus Mick Stanton, which was a very, very interesting fight. I believe it only lasted a round, possibly 2. But I believe that Mick Stanton was pretty much winning the majority of the time. And then at the very, very end, Bonner got, it was sort of a weird, a north-south choke variation, and actually choked him out on the bell. So the referee separated them and then realized that Stanton was unconscious. So those two have had a little bit of needle going back a few years. And if you look back to when Bonner was the Cage Warriors middleweight champion, Stanton was constantly calling him out to run that back. So again, a win for Matt Bonner here. He's going to be looking at Stanton as well. And as you said, there's history between Bonner and Webb. So there's a lot potentially going on with this one. Darren Stewart, obviously a guy that we know likes a stand and bang kind of fight. Matt Bonner, more than happy to do that with pretty much anyone. We saw him stand toe-to-toe with Matthias Frederick. So I'm sure he'd be happy to test himself in that sort of realm against a UFC veteran like Darren. But we saw Darren last time out using his wrestling, taking it to the ground, using his top control to grind out a real lopsided decision over a top contender in Leonardo. So very, very interested to see how this one plays out. I wouldn't put money on it being a stand-up fight or a ground fight. I genuinely don't know, but I'm intrigued to see it, and I think it's a good main event.
I think that's the case for all of these kind of Cage Warriors middleweight veterans. I feel like it's almost a middleweight veteran division now in Cage Warriors. Like, any of them can come out and throw a big right hand at you or strike with you, or any of them will come out and take you on. I remember one time I interviewed James Webb and I watched a good few of his fights, and like, one thing I noticed in one of his fights was like he threw the right hand all the time, and he had a big strong right hand, and then it was almost like the fight where he started wrestling lads the whole time, and I'm like, I just asked this lad about striking, and for the next 4 fights he's just been, you know, absolutely taking lads down and beating them on the ground. Like, what have I been watching? But that can happen, and you see with experienced guys that sometimes does happen, especially, you know, you take a lick off one of these lads and you don't want to take another one, you know, with the power they have. So yeah, I kind of think it's going to be Stewart trying to strike and Bonner trying to take him down a little bit, but as we say, who knows? Like, the next gen lads are funny as well. Like, sometimes they come out and they're all striking, and sometimes they come out and they're all wrestling as well. So I was watching the Luke Riley fight as well last night, and they're all that way, you know. You never know what you're going to get from them. So I think it's going to be an interesting fight and an interesting main event over. It's 3 rounds, isn't it? Yeah, 3 rounds.
That's right. Yeah, 3 round, yeah. three round non-title main event.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's always better. And Cage Warriors always do that. They do obviously the fight for the titles, but yeah, I like that. Let's talk about the co-main event, because this is a very interesting fight. Reece McEwan versus Leonardo de Oliveira. Now, I went and I watched some Reece McEwan, found a good bit of him on Fight Pass and other places. Leonardo, not so much. What I did find was a load of jiu-jitsu matches is the one thing. And I'll tell you, I don't know much about jiu-jitsu, but he looks pretty tasty from the few jiu-jitsu matches I watched. That happens a lot of time, and I'm sure Ian Dean has probably seen a load of him now and makes this match because of that. But it must be dangerous for a guy like Reece, you know, as we kind of alluded to earlier on, maybe on the verge of a title shot, going in with a guy who looks like he's going to be unbelievable on the ground, but you never know what you're going to get, and there isn't that much tape on him. It's a bit of a risky one here, isn't it, going into the unknown?
Yeah, absolutely. Leonardo is a black belt, a very good one, as you say, very active in jiu-jitsu and submission grappling competitions. I think it's the right kind of test for Reece. You know, you look at his record now, 6-1 as a professional going into this fight. You've got to start facing the guys who are, you know, a little bit dangerous in certain areas and who are going to pose a threat to you. There's no point constantly fighting guys. I'm not saying that Reece has been doing this, obviously, but, you know, just in general terms, there's no point constantly fighting guys where you know you're the better striker, you know you're the better grappler, you know you've got better wrestling, because you're not going to get better and you're not going to learn anything. And if you look at Reece McEwan's career, going way back to his days as an amateur, he was constantly fighting better guys or more experienced guys. He was taking kickboxing fights against guys with 5, 6, 7 times the amount of kickboxing experience that he had, and he was winning. Has a win over Kalen Lotterin as an amateur. I believe it's just him and Nathan Fletcher that beat Kalen as an amateur. So, you know, it shows you the high level of guy that he was willing to face early on in his career. And, you know, again, he's going to face a guy who's, you would imagine, going to pose a pretty significant threat on the ground. So be interesting to see what Reece does here. Does he use his wrestling in reverse, keep the fight on the feet, try and knock this guy out? Or does he say, you know what, I'm going to test myself, find out where my level is, take this guy down, try and ground and pound him, and all of a sudden you submit a BJJ black belt, and that win just means that little bit something extra.
100%. And as you said, when you have that backstory, when you're on the verge of it as well, like if Kalen is having another fight, it may make a lot of sense, especially if you go out there and you know, let's say if you were to get a submission or something like that. I think it would say a lot to you. That's a very, very interesting one. Another interesting fight is Andy Clamp, who's taking on Ghassan Abdenabi, whose name I pronounced perfectly there.
Ghassan Abdenabi.
That's the one. Watching Andy, he's a very good athlete. Like, it's funny because his name is Andy Clamp, and it's not exactly like, it's like the old school English soccer players. They have like, you know, these like, he's from Coventry and he's like this normal English name, and next thing he's absolutely brilliant. I feel like Andy Clamp is a little bit like that. His name is too English to be to be as good as he is. But anyway, that's just me being a prick. But this is at 205 pounds, isn't it? Obviously, we just spoke a minute ago. The title is up for grabs there, I suppose. You know, he lost to Chuck Campbell, unfortunately for him, last time out, but he was on some run before that, winning, 6 in a row. There's a no contest stuck in the middle of that as well. But with a record of, 11-2, Andy Clam must surely, if he gets a win here, especially, must be in line for that title if they're going to obviously bring it back. We know some of the titles that it's hard to get a division for them, but if there's one guy for it, maybe he's the guy. What do you think about that?
Yeah, he's, as you say, he's on a great run. I think, the only really knock on Andy is that he's had a few periods of inactivity, which, in complete fairness, weren't of his own doing. Various things that kept him out of the cage. And you come back in against a guy like Chuck Campbell, who we obviously saw, go on to fight for the title. And you'll notice that when he fought Modestas for the title, it was a very, very tentative opening 12 minutes or so. Modestas normally goes steaming in there, and it was very, very much two guys kind of standing their ground and waiting, because neither wanted to be the first to make that mistake. And then you saw what happened when the mistake was made. And I think, for Andy, he just went in there last time against Chuck Campbell and didn't really get time to get started and just got caught cold. And with these light heavyweight guys, middleweight guys, and heavyweights, obviously take one big punch, you're going down. There's not really much that can be done about it. So great to see Andy back in, getting another shot. He's a guy whose career I've followed for a long, long time. I've called amateur fights of his over 10 years ago. He actually fought in Cage Warriors as an amateur. Fought my friend Luke the Animal Taylor many, many years ago in Liverpool, I believe, on the undercard of one of the Echo Arena shows, back as an amateur. So it's great to see him back as a pro. Trains under Tom Blackledge, absolute UK MMA legend. Obviously, very catch wrestling inspired game plans that he brings in, takedowns, heavy top control, ground and pound. So if he can get Abdenabi to the mat, it's going to be very, very interesting. Abdenabi, not a massive amount of MMA experience by comparison. I think he's 4-0. But you'll notice a lot of his fights, if you look for his MMA fights, took place in a ring. And he's fought on a show called Infusion. It's essentially a kickboxing show that occasionally does a little bit of MMA. So kickboxing background outside of MMA, that don't be deceived by the 4-0. He's got a lot of combat sports experience. And he's got some wins by submission on his ledger as well. I don't think he's going to want to be testing his submission skills against Clamp. But I think we're in for a classic striker versus grappler kind of thing. And they're always good fun, right? Especially when it's light heavyweights, especially when they're both 6.5 feet tall.
So yeah, after watching both of these lads, I think someone's getting finished here. I don't think the judges will be wanted for this one, but you never know. You never know. I think my favorite fight in this card is Rory Evans versus Jack Eglin, because you look at their records and they're 5-4 and 3-2, but it really doesn't show what they are. Like it really, really doesn't, because not only are they very good fighters, but they've fought very good fighters as well. Like you look at Evans, he's fought Wesley Maya, he's fought Liam Gittins, obviously he was supposed to be on this, he fought Josh Reed, Ben Reece, and he's only 9 fights into his career with all those lads. Jack Eglin on the other side of it then, he's fought Luke Riley, who I mentioned earlier on, fought Jimmy Fallon, fought, even as an amateur, he fought Nick Bagley, fought Nathaniel Wood. It's insane the level that they have actually fought against, and watching both of their tape, it's high level, because Evans is strong and Eglin is fast. I think that's what you would say about him. Like the old school kind of boxing stance from Evans, very good offensively. I think maybe defensively, because he hasn't had many fights, like that will improve, but I think that's been the reason why he's lost a few of his fights. And going in there against Eglin, he's going to have to be better defensively, because he's such a good technical striker, goes to the body, goes up high, good in the clinch, good takedowns as well, and also strong. So jeez, I don't know about you, Brad, but I feel like this is the type of one, if someone is telling me what fight do I need to be tuning into, I'm like, if you like high level stuff from, the guys on the way up, this is the one for me. It's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, I completely agree. This is my kind of like sleeper fight for fight of the night here on this card. Again, Eglin, been watching his fights. I believe I called some of his amateur fights on the Cage Warriors Academy. But when you make, he fought pro on the Cage Warriors Academy as well, but when you make your Cage Warriors debut against Luke Riley and then fight Sam Kelly in your very next fight, there are a lot of fighters that say, I only want to fight the toughest guys that are out there for me. Eglin is a guy who means it. You can't give this guy an easy fight as a present. He won't take it. He just wants to be in there with high level guys, and that's what we've seen from every fight in Cage Warriors and dating back to the academy as well. As you say, very fast, very technical, and he's fighting a guy in Evans who's kind of like your old school tough guy, just hits like an absolute mallet. I mean, if you watch the fight with, I believe it's Jimmy Fell from a couple of years ago, which again was another one of those empty arena shows. He finishes the fight with ground and pound, but it's a knockout, which you don't always see with ground and pound. It's usually a TKO, but he hits him twice, 3 times maybe, and the sound of it is absolutely absurd. And he put Jimmy Fell out cold, with not even a massive amount of leverage on those punches. So you've always got to be wary of that power. Especially if he gets on top of you. I'm very, very interested to see how this one plays out. Power versus speed. Cannot wait.
100%. And I suppose that's it for the main card. We'll quickly run through the undercard. A few things that stand out to me. Scott Pedersen, I feel like every time we do one of these previews, Scott Pedersen is on the card. Another guy whose record doesn't show how good he is. A very, very, very good fighter. Great to have a women's featherweight fight on the card as well. Stephanie Evans, obviously another Welsh person on the card, which is very good as well. And I was very impressed with Milad Ahady, 5-1, a really, really, really good striker. Southpaw hits very hard. Head kicks, and I feel like this is the type of one where we might see another one of those head kicks, to be honest. Bastos is, he's game, but I think Ahady is a different level type of fighter, and that should be an interesting one there as well. You've Ewan Davis, who's 3-0 against Hadji Ndiaye, who's 4-2, been around for a while as well. What stands out to you on that undercard maybe that people need to tune in for, and who's the kind of the up and comer? I know Jimmy Quinn and Dan Kneil as well as on it.
Yeah, so Jimmy Quill and Dan Neal's going to open the main card now. So that's been moved up. That'll be our opening bout. Dan Kneil from the Lions Den, gym full of really, really tough dudes. They won a Cage Warriors Academy title just a couple of weekends ago. It's the same gym that Craig Thundercat White fought out of rather before he retired. So always great to have the Lions.
Show us that glass of Vimto there. Come on.
Big up Craig White.
There we go, the legend.
Always great to have the Lions Den guys. Dave Matthews, a coach. He's an absolute superstar. Absolutely love him to bits. Legend. Jimmy Quinn, another former Cage Warriors Academy champion, making his pro debut. So definitely one to keep an eye on. And as you said, Milad Ahady, he's part of the MMA Fight Academy, which is the reality show that Cage Warriors are doing in association with Mola. So it's not like an Ultimate Fighter style show where they're all in a house and then they train and fight each other. It's sort of a documentary style thing about the creation of a fight team. So they're training together, and then there's been some of them fighting on Cage Warriors on the cards. You saw some of them fighting on the Road to the UFC cards over in Asia a few weeks ago. So the show sort of documenting, what they've been able to do as a team. And they've had world-class coaching out in San Diego. They've had everything paid for. They're on salary. So they've been training like full-time professionals, which for the vast majority of them is the first time they've ever had the luxury of doing that. Do some interesting results so far. So Anthony Orozco a few weeks ago in California. You saw Teddy Adlington Stringer, who's one of the UK's top amateurs over the past few years. Both those guys came out and got incredible wins. And, Milad's going to be looking to follow in the footsteps today. Unlike many of them, we have seen him on Cage Warriors before. Fought Antonio Sheldon, fought Tom Mearns, 2 absolute tear-ups. If you just want to see 2 guys just punch lumps out of each other, go and dial those up on UFC Fight Pass. Milad's a really, really tough guy. As you said, loves that head kick, throws them up and down for fun. So maybe want to keep an eye on the prelims on Saturday night. Yeah,
if you look at the lads on the wall behind me, the type of fighters I like, and he's one of them fighters. So I'm looking forward to that. And even though the card was kind of ravaged, we still have important fights, because that's what Cage Warriors do. Like it's either a guy going to that level to go to the next level, or a guy going to that level, going to that level, going to the next level. It's a ladder, and everyone's on a rung of a ladder, which is very interesting. I feel like that's a thing that we just don't get much of in MMA anymore. Like, with all due respect to the UFC, we don't get in the UFC. Like 90% of fights in the UFC are people just go nowhere, and it seems like Bellator is the same and other people are saying, but with Cage Warriors we know you're not getting that anyway. So all right,
we'll never let you down, Sean. We'll never let you down.
Never let me down. All right, Brad, we leave it there. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Looking forward to hearing your voice on Saturday night? Is it Saturday night?
Saturday night. Cardiff.
Night. Beautiful.
7:30 UK main card, so slightly earlier than normal if you are tuning in. There's a UFC on that starts early, so we go at prelims at 6, main card 7:30, and we'll be done by 10. So nice early night if you wanted to go out for a pint afterwards.
And no Premier League either to clash with as well, which is the absolute best. All the Cage Warriors cards should be at this time of the year. I've nothing to do on a Saturday now, so yeah, that's it's a good time to have it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. All right, Brad, we leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to everybody for watching and listening. My name is Sean Sheehan for SureDog.com, and I will see you all next time.